Two billionaires walked into their private gym looking for a punching bag. They found one. A limping janitor, 38 years old, smelled like bleach, bad knee, worse coat. They offered him $500 to stand still and take hits. He said yes. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was throwing the first punch. Because the moment that fist left Logan Pierce's glove, something behind Gavin Mercer's eyes went completely, terrifyingly quiet. And 40 seconds later, both brothers were flat on their backs, staring at fluorescent lights, trying to remember how to breathe. If you've never seen expensive training get destroyed by desperation, you're about to. Subscribe and follow this story to the end, because what happens next will change how you see strength forever. Hit that like button. Drop your city and country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. The mopey handle had a crack in it. Gavin had been meaning to report it for 3 weeks, but the maintenance request form required a supervisor's signature, and the supervisor, a soft-handed man named Dale who wore polo shirts tucked into khakis, was never around when Gavin needed him, and always around when Gavin didn't. So the mop stayed cracked. Gavin kept using it. That's the thing about broken tools. They still work, mostly. You just have to know how to hold them. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, somewhere around 7:15, when the Iron District Combat Academy was mostly empty. The after-work crowd had cleared out. The serious amateur fighters had finished their drills. What remained were 2 men in the corner of the main floor, moving through combinations with the kind of aggressive energy that came from too much money and too little resistance. Gavin had learned to identify the types in his 8 months here. There were the grinders, guys who worked real jobs, grabbed 45 minutes on the mat before picking up their kids, who taped their own hands and reused their wraps until they fell apart. They nodded at Gavin sometimes. A few of them called him by name. Then there were the buyers. The buyers purchased memberships the way they purchased watches, as statements. They had personalized training schedules printed in color on thick cardstock. They wore gear that still smelled like the box. They treated the cleaning staff the way most people treat furniture. Not rudely, exactly, just without registering that it existed. Landon and Logan Pierce were buyers, premium grade. Gavin had overheard enough to know the basics. Twin brothers, 32 years old, tech acquisitions, a combined net worth somewhere north of $300 million depending on the market that week. They used the Academy's private studio, a glassed-in room at the back that non-members could see into but never enter. 4 evenings a week with a private coach named Marco Reyes, who had 3 regional titles and a genuinely threatening presence. Marco had left 2 weeks ago. Family emergency down in Tucson, people said. No replacement yet. The twins hadn't taken it well. Gavin squeezed out the mop head and watched the dirty water swirl down the floor drain, gray and chemical smelling. His right knee had started its late evening complaint, a grinding ache that radiated up into his hip when he stood too long on hard floors. An old injury. Old enough that he barely thought about it anymore, except in moments exactly like this one, when his body sent a quiet reminder that nothing heals perfectly. Not really, it just learns to compensate. He rolled the bucket toward the water fountain alcove and heard boots on the mat behind him. "Hey, janitor!" Gavin turned slowly. Landon Pierce. He could tell them apart because Landon kept his hair shorter and stood with his weight slightly forward, like a man perpetually ready to argue, was walking toward him with Logan at his shoulder. Both men were in training shorts and compression tops, both still slightly out of breath. Landon was holding a towel and using it the way rich men use things. Not quite fully, as though effort itself was a resource to be conserved. "You're Gavin, right?" Logan said. "That's right." "You got a second?" Gavin looked at his mop, then at them. "Sure." Landon cut straight to it. "Marco's gone. We've got a regionals exhibition in 6 weeks and we need to stay sharp." He paused like he was running a calculation. "We need someone to spar with, not coach us. Just absorb some contact. Keep us moving." "I'm the maintenance staff," Gavin said. "We know what you are." Not cruel exactly, just Landon. "We're not asking you to teach anything. We just need a warm body that can take some hits and stay upright long enough to be useful." He reached into the pocket of his training shorts and produced a folded set of bills held with a silver clip. The kind of money clip that cost more than Gavin's monthly transit pass. $500. Cash. Tonight. The fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly, a tiny irregular tick that Gavin had been meaning to add to the maintenance log. He thought about Emma's winter coat, the one she'd outgrown in October, the one she currently replaced with two sweatshirts layered over each other, which she insisted was fine, which was the saddest thing she'd ever said. He thought about the eviction notice folded in his jacket pocket. The third one, his landlord, a man named Ferris, who communicated exclusively through envelopes and passive aggression, had given him until Friday. $500. "I'm not a fighter," Gavin said. "Didn't ask if you were." A long pause. The gym hummed around them. Somewhere in the back, a heavy bag swayed on its chain. "I'll need gear," Gavin said finally. "Helmet, gloves, mouthguard." Logan almost smiled. "We've got all that." "And if I say stop, we stop." Landon nodded easily, already losing interest in the negotiation now that it was going his way. "Sure. Whatever you need." Gavin looked at the cracked mop handle one more time. Then he set it against the wall and followed the Pierce brothers toward the back of the gym. The private studio smelled different from the main floor. Less bleach, more leather, the faint metallic undertone of equipment that got wiped down after every session. The walls were mirrored on three sides. The mat was newer, a deep charcoal gray, without the patchy discoloration of the main floor's older sections. Framed photos of championship fighters lined the only solid wall, black and white, the kind of aesthetic decision that cost money to achieve. A young guy named Chase, some kind of assistant the brothers kept around, Gavin had seen him carrying bags and holding open doors, dug through a gear locker and handed Gavin a helmet, gloves, and a sealed mouthguard still in its plastic packaging. Gavin fitted the helmet and pulled the gloves on, working the Velcro with the particular efficiency of someone who had done it many times in a very different context. His hands were larger than they looked in the rubber cleaning gloves. The knuckles had old marks on them, not the neat ring-shaped bruising of sport fighters, but something more irregular, the geography of impacts that happened in various directions under various conditions. He kept the gloves low and loose, made himself look uncertain with them, which wasn't entirely acting. These were sport gloves, padded in the specific way of sport training, and they sat differently on his hands than what he was used to from a long time ago. Landon rolled his neck, a sharp crackling sound, and circled toward center mat. "We'll start easy," he said. "Just movement. Stay in range and try to cover up." Gavin shuffled to the center. His knee ticked. "Easy," he agreed. The first combination came fast. A jab cross hook that Landon threw at maybe 60% power, the kind of thing designed to test response time and create rhythm. Gavin took the jab on the helmet, slipped the cross slightly wrong-looking, and absorbed the hook on his forearm guard. He stumbled back 2 steps, made it look worse than it was. "Good," Landon said, not to Gavin, to Logan. "At least he moves." Logan came in from the side. A teep, a push kick that caught Gavin in the sternum and walked him backward into the mirror. The glass held. Gavin caught himself with both hands behind him and pushed off, moving back to center with the careful, slightly too slow footwork of a man who didn't know what he was doing, which was working. The brothers settled into their rhythm. They were technically proficient. Gavin had to give them that honestly. Marco Reyes had done good work. Their form was clean, their combinations had logical structure, and their footwork showed real training hours behind it. In a competition ring against other sport fighters their age and weight, they would be genuinely dangerous. They came after Gavin with increasing confidence, which was exactly what they were designed to do. Sport fighters raid calibrated resistance. They pushed harder when the opposition felt manageable. They opened up. They committed to their best techniques. That confidence was also the gap. He took 3 more combinations, absorbed a roundhouse that stung his ribs through the padding, went down to one knee after a body shot, which produced a laugh from Chase in the corner and a sound of satisfaction from Logan. There it is. Gavin registered the laughter the way he registered most things, as data, filed, processed, set aside. He got back up. "You doing okay over there, Janitor?" Landon called out. He wasn't even breathing hard. "Don't tap out on us yet." "I'm good," Gavin said. His voice came out flat. He was breathing through his nose, which was a thing he still did automatically. An old discipline from an old life that his body had never fully unlearned. Here is what Landon and Logan Pierce did not know about Gavin Mercer, because there was no reason anyone in that gym would know it, and because Gavin had spent years making sure no one could easily find out. He had served 11 years in the United States Army, including 3 deployments, one to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, both of the Afghan tours in Kunar province, which is a mountainous region near the Pakistan border, and one of the more persistently hostile assignments a soldier could draw. He had left as a staff sergeant. The circumstances of his departure were complicated, and he did not discuss them. During his service, he had cross-trained with the 75th Ranger Regiment on 3 separate occasions and had attended SEER school twice. He had been through the Army Combatives program at Level 4, the highest standard, and had supplemented that training with practical instruction in Krav Maga and Sistema during a training exchange program in 2015 that he was technically still not authorized to discuss in full detail. More to the point, he had been in 6 real fights, not competition, not sparring. Situations where the other people involved intended serious harm to him or to people he was responsible for, and where the outcome had been determined by who could think most clearly under the worst possible conditions. He had won all 6. He had also acquired, across those years, a torn meniscus in his right knee, 2 healed rib fractures, a permanently reduced range of motion in his left shoulder, and a recurring muscle spasm in his lower back that appeared when he was exhausted or cold, or both. These injuries were real. The limp was real. The clicking sound when he moved was real. None of it was weakness. It was the map of a life that had been lived at full contact with reality. He had come back from the Army at 29 with a rucksack, a service record, and a head full of things that made sleeping difficult. He had married a woman named Claire who had tried and genuinely loved him, and eventually accepted that some distances can't be closed regardless of love. Emma had been born when Gavin was 31. Claire had left when Emma was 3, not dramatically, not with cruelty, just with the quiet finality of someone who finally understands the shape of a situation and accepts it. Gavin had taken the custodial work because it was consistent, because the physical routine helped, and because the hours allowed him to get Emma to school and pick her up on the days that were his. He was not ashamed of it, but he had never stopped being what the Army had made him. You don't unlearn that. The muscle memory sits deeper than conscious thought. The tactical reading of space and movement becomes as automatic as breathing. You stop seeing people as people first. You see angles, distances, weight distribution, the micro-telegraphs that happen before any committed attack. It lives in your nervous system long after everything else about that life has been put away. He had not wanted to use it tonight. He had genuinely planned to just take the hits and collect the money. He could absorb the discomfort. He'd absorbed worse. He could ignore the laughter. But then Logan had said something to land in between combinations. Quiet, pitched low, not meant to carry. But Gavin's hearing had been tested by situations where missing a sound could mean missing a warning. Honestly, he probably doesn't even feel it. Look at him. What kind of life is this, man? Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. The kind of contempt that wasn't even aware of itself as contempt. The dismissal that goes so deep, it doesn't need to be stated. Gavin had breathed out through his nose and decided something. He took his helmet off. It was such a small motion that for a moment no one registered it. He reached up, unclipped the chin strap, and pulled the helmet free. Set it on the mat beside him. Chase looked up from his phone. Logan stopped mid-combination, gloves still raised, and looked at the helmet on the mat and then at Gavin's face. Something in the calculation shifted, the way light changes when a cloud moves, barely perceptible, but immediately felt. "What are you doing?" Landon said. "It was blocking my vision," Gavin said simply. "You need the helmet. This is a contact session. I know what this is." The temperature in the room did not change. The lighting did not change. But something in the private studio shifted in a way that was difficult to name, a quality of attention, maybe, or the absence of something that had been there a moment before. Something like the feeling of a room before a storm, when the air pressure drops and the birds go quiet. Logan exchanged a look with his brother. Then he shrugged and reset his stance. "Your call," he said, and came forward. His first attack was a sharp jab aimed at Gavin's nose, a real jab, focused, perhaps 75% power, the kind designed to create distance and test respect for the technique. Gavin wasn't there. Not quite. He had moved a fraction of a second before the jab fully committed. Not backward, which is the sport response, but slightly to the outside, a small angular shift that took him out of the direct line without breaking engagement range. The jab kissed air. Logan's shoulder came forward on the extension, his weight momentarily loaded forward and to the right. Gavin's left hand closed on Logan's collar. Not hard, just present, a grip point. Logan felt it and immediately recognized the danger. His weight was loaded wrong, his base was compromised, and tried to step back to reset. Gavin moved with him, not fighting the step but redirecting it, a motion that looked almost gentle from the outside except for the outcome. Logan's rear foot hit the mat at the wrong angle, his knee bent inward, and his center of gravity tilted past the point of recovery. The sweep was barely a sweep. It was closer to a guided fall. Logan went down. He hit the mat hard. Not injury hard, but hard enough that the impact rolled through the room like a door slamming. Gavin was already in control position above him before Logan's back fully registered the surface. Right knee driving to the mat beside Logan's hip, left hand still on collar, right arm extended with the fist positioned precisely 4 inches from Logan's jaw. Not touching, just there. The room was absolutely silent. Logan looked up at the fist 4 inches from his face, then at Gavin's eyes. His own expression went through 3 things very quickly: surprise, anger, and then something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it: a recalibration. The look of a man who has just discovered that the ground he was standing on was not actually solid. Gavin held the position for 2 full seconds. Then he stood, stepped back, and turned toward Landon. Landon Pierce had gone very still. His gloves were still raised. His weight was back, which was the trained response to an unexpected threat. But his eyes were doing something that his body wasn't, which was trying to figure out what had just happened. The calculation behind his expression was almost visible. "What was that?" he said. Not a question, almost a statement of refusal, like his brain was rejecting the data. "You ready?" Gavin asked. Landon came forward differently than his brother. More controlled. He circled, keeping range, not committing early. He was recalibrating in real time, which spoke to good training. He had felt the shift in the room and he was responding to it rather than pretending it hadn't happened. That was the smarter play. It wasn't smart enough. He threw a low kick, a well-timed calf kick aimed at Gavin's right leg, the kind of technique that accumulates damage and limits mobility. It was precisely the correct attack given what Landon knew. The knee was bad, the kick would hurt, and a hobbled opponent could be overwhelmed with combinations. Gavin checked the kick with his shin, which stung sharply, and in the same motion stepped inside Landon's recovery step. The fraction of a second when the kicking leg is returning to the ground and the body weight is transitioning. Landon's guard was coming back up. His lead arm was extended slightly as it reached. Gavin took the arm. Not wrenching it, not jerking. A controlled wrap that leveraged the arm's own momentum and transferred it downward, rotating Landon's shoulder and tilting his entire upper body. His free hand went to the back of Landon's neck, not gripping but guiding, and Landon's face arrived at the mat with a thud that he had no way to prevent without dislocating something, because the physics of the sequence left him exactly 0 good options. Down. Gavin pinned him with minimal weight, knee across the hip, arm control, nothing dramatic. The position was clean and held no exits that weren't going to be painful to pursue. He looked at Logan, who had gotten to his feet and taken 2 steps forward before stopping. "Don't," Gavin said quietly. Logan stopped. The 3 of them stayed in that configuration for a long moment. Gavin breathing through his nose, controlled even, not labored. Landon with his cheek against the mat and his arm in a controlled lock. Logan standing with his gloves at his sides, expression doing something complicated. Chase had put his phone down at some point. Gavin hadn't registered exactly when. Gavin released Landon and stood. His knee was hurting, his ribs were hurting. The shoulder had sent him a sharp reminder when he'd taken Landon down, a flash of pain that he'd routed around automatically, without thought, because routing around pain was a skill he'd built over 11 years of learning what his body could still do when the alternative was unacceptable. He walked to where he'd set the helmet on the mat and picked it up, turned to the brothers. "The money," he said. "We agreed on 500. Landon was sitting up. His expression had gone through its recalibrations and arrived somewhere more settled. Not anger, not humiliation exactly, but a rawness that didn't have a clean name. Like someone who has just found out something true that they would have preferred not to know. Logan was looking at Gavin with an expression that mixed respect with something like calculation. It was a businessman, Gavin had noticed. Things got assessed quickly and filed under utility. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Landon laughed. It was a short sound, involuntary, slightly rough. He pressed the heel of his glove against his forehead and laughed in a way that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the release valve of a person who has just had a fundamental assumption destroyed. Yeah, he said. Yeah, the money. He nodded to Chase, who went to the gear bag in the corner, produced an envelope, brought it to Gavin. Gavin didn't count it. He put the envelope in the front pocket of his work pants. "Who are you?" Logan said. It wasn't hostile, it was the stripped-down version of the question, the one beneath the one. "What are you? What just happened? What does this mean?" Gavin looked at him for a moment. Then he set the helmet on the bench beside the gear locker. "Maintenance," he said. He walked toward the door. His knee clicked twice on the way out. Behind him, the two wealthiest men in the room sat in the silence of their private studio with the most expensive equipment money could purchase, underneath photographs of champions, breathing through the very specific embarrassment of men who have discovered that the world is much larger than their understanding of it. Gavin retrieved his mop from against the wall outside. The crack in the handle hadn't gone anywhere. He went back to work. I was 3/4 through mopping the rear corridor when his phone buzzed in his pocket, and the number on the screen was one he hadn't seen in over 4 years, which meant it wasn't the Pierce brothers, and it wasn't Emma's school, and it wasn't his landlord. It was a contact saved under a single initial. R. Gavin stopped mopping. He looked at the screen for a long moment. The corridor hummed its fluorescent hum. The phone buzzed again. A second time, patient, insistent. Whatever was about to happen, it had nothing to do with rent or sparring or $500 in an envelope. His jaw tightened. He answered. The phone felt heavier than it should have. Gavin stood in the corridor with the mop handle in one hand and the screen glowing in the other, and the single letter R sat there in the contact field like a splinter he'd forgotten was still under his skin. 4 years of silence. 4 years of nothing, which was the arrangement. The understood and unspoken agreement that the people you leave behind in a certain kind of life don't call unless the alternative is worse than calling. He answered. Yeah. A pause. Background noise on the other end, or wind, or something like wind, and the faint structural hum of a vehicle in motion. Then a voice Gavin recognized the way you recognize a scar. Not fondly, just completely. You still in Portland? Who wants to know? Still you, Mercer. Same answer it's always been. Gavin looked down the corridor. Empty. The fluorescent tube at the far end had developed a new flicker since last week. A stuttering pulse that made the shadows at that end of the hallway do something slightly wrong. He'd reported it twice. Still on the list. What do you need, Reyes? Not a question. The name settled into the corridor like a stone into still water. Marco Reyes. The private instructor the Pierce brothers had lost 2 weeks ago to a family emergency in Tucson. Except Marco Reyes had no family in Tucson. Gavin had known Marco for 11 years, starting at a fire base in Kunar Province in 2013, when Marco had been attached to their unit as a contractor doing work that wasn't written down anywhere. And the one consistent fact about Marco Reyes across all those years was that his family was dead. Both parents, a younger sister, all 3 gone before Marco turned 25. And he had never, not once, referred to Tucson in any context. So the family emergency was a cover story, which meant Marco's departure from the academy was not a departure. It was a position change, which meant something was happening that Gavin was not yet supposed to know about. I need 20 minutes, Marco said. In person, tonight. I'm working. I know you're working. I need 20 minutes. Gavin thought about the envelope in his pocket, about the mop, about the maintenance log sitting in the break room with its 7 outstanding items and the cracked handle and the flickering tube at the end of the hall. Where? He said. The address Marco gave him was a parking structure 3 blocks east of the academy, the kind that serves a building that empties out after 6 and doesn't fill again until morning. Gavin told the overnight supervisor, a tired man named Phil, who communicated primarily through sighing, that he needed a 20-minute break. Phil sighed. Gavin took it as permission. Outside, the November air was cold in a wet way. Not raining yet, but promising to. The sky the color of old concrete, the streets reflecting streetlight in long orange smears. Gavin walked the 3 blocks with his hands in his jacket pockets and his collar up, moving at the pace of a man who has somewhere to be but isn't performing urgency about it. He passed a woman walking a small dog who looked at him briefly and then away. He passed a food cart closing up for the night, the owner pulling a tarp over the steam trays with practiced efficiency. The parking structure was 4 levels, mostly empty. Gavin took the stairs rather than the elevator, a habit, and found Marco on the 2nd level, leaning against a concrete pillar beside a dark gray rental SUV with the engine running. Marco Reyes looked the same and different in the way that time accomplishes on people who've spent it at high RPM. He was 41, black, lean in a functional way rather than an aesthetic one, with a close-cut beard that was showing gray at the edges. He was wearing a jacket that cost real money but was chosen for mobility rather than appearance. He had a paper coffee cup in one hand and the expression of a man running a continuous background calculation that only occasionally surfaced on his face. He looked at Gavin for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at Gavin's work uniform, the gray slacks, the Academy logo polo, the worn boots. "You look like hell," Marco said. "You look like you're lying about Tucson," Gavin said. Marco almost smiled. He pushed off the pillar and opened the rear door of the SUV with 2 fingers, a gesture that meant get in without making it a request. Gavin got in. Marco walked around and got in the other side. The interior was warm, smelled like recycled air, and someone else's fast food from a previous rental. Marco killed the cabin light with a button on the door panel. "How'd you end up at that gym?" Marco said. It wasn't an accusation, just a question asked the way Marco asked things, flatly, without judgment, because the judgment was a separate process that he ran quietly and revealed later. "It's 30 hours a week, and they don't run background checks aggressively." Marco nodded slowly. "You meet the Pierce brothers." "Tonight, yeah." Gavin paused. "They hired me to eat hits. I took the money. And they had good technique, and they're going to be someone's problem if they don't develop better situational awareness." Marco turned his head and looked at him. "You demonstrated that." "Not fully, but enough." Gavin didn't answer. The parking structure creaked faintly above them. Thermal expansion or a car on the level above, one or the other. "Gavin." Marco set the coffee cup on the center console. He turned in his seat, which was a thing Marco did when he wanted full attention, because Marco's default was facing forward. "There is a situation. It is specific. It is time-sensitive. And the reason I'm sitting in this parking garage at 8 p.m. instead of calling someone with more operational bandwidth is because the situation requires a particular kind of person, and the particular kind of person needs to already be in position." Gavin looked at him. "Say the rest," Gavin said. "The Iron District Academy has been under a network watch for 11 months, Marco said. Not the gym itself, the building, the ownership structure behind the building, which runs through 3 LLCs and a property management company registered in Delaware, which routes back to a man named Harlan Goss. You know that name?" "No." "You will." Marco reached into his jacket and produced a phone. Not his personal phone, something flat and unbranded, the kind of device that gets purchased for a specific purpose and disposed of after. He brought up a photograph and held the screen toward Gavin. "Goss is 63, former procurement consultant for defense contractors, 2 periods between 2004 and 2012. He left that world under circumstances that were papered over adequately at the time, but have become relevant again recently." A pause. "He is currently running a financing operation through a series of front businesses. The Academy is one of 4 properties in the Portland metro that serve as nodes in the network." "Nodes," Gavin said. "Money comes in dirty, goes out clean. The gym's cash revenue is the mechanism. Memberships, private sessions, merchandise, all of it inflated on the books. It's not sophisticated, it's durable." Marco put the phone away. "What makes Goss relevant right now, as opposed to 11 months ago when the watch started, is that 3 weeks ago he made contact with a weapons broker operating out of Vancouver. We believe a transaction is being structured, not weapons themselves, documentation. Routing information. The kind of infrastructure that supports procurement of things that are significantly worse than money laundering." Gavin absorbed this. Outside the SUV, somewhere in the structure, a car door slammed and footsteps moved away toward the stairs. "What does this have to do with me specifically?" he said. "You have people. You have resources." We have a problem with insertion, Marco said. Goss's people swept the gym 2 months ago. Any new face at the management or coaching level trips their protocol. They vet hard, and they vet fast, and 3 of our people got burned trying to come in through those channels in the last 6 months. We need someone who is already in the building, already invisible. He stopped. Already not worth looking at twice. The sentence landed in the car and sat there. Gavin looked at this concrete pillar in front of the vehicle. The parking structure's overhead light painted everything in a flat yellow that made people look slightly unwell. I'm a custodian, he said. You have access to every room in that building. You have keys. You have a schedule that puts you in proximity to offices, equipment rooms, and private spaces without triggering anyone's alarm response. Marco picked up the coffee cup again, looked at it, set it back down. You have a particular skill set that has not diminished as much as your current employment might suggest. You don't know what's diminished. No, Marco conceded. I don't. That's why I'm asking instead of assuming. He met Gavin's eyes directly. I need someone in that building who can move, observe, and if necessary, respond. I need them there starting now, not in 3 weeks when we run a new insertion protocol. You are already there. The rain started then. Not hard, just the advanced scouts of it, a scattered tapping on the concrete above the open sides of the structure. The orange streetlight reflections on the wet pavement outside lengthened and shimmered. Gavin thought about Emma sleeping under the patched blanket, about the $500 in the envelope, about the eviction notice that would still be in his jacket pocket tomorrow morning, regardless of what happened in this parking structure tonight. He thought about the phone contact saved as R and what it cost, specifically, to be the kind of person that contact called when they needed someone already invisible and already in position. What's the ask? He said. Exactly. Observation, access support. You continue your current role. You report through a dead drop protocol I'll give you tonight. If the situation escalates to contact, it won't escalate to contact, Gavin said. I'm not operational. Marco was quiet for a moment. Okay. I mean that. I heard you, Gavin. Another silence. The rain intensified slightly, becoming consistent, the sound of it changing from random impacts to a steady white noise against the structure. Compensation, Gavin said finally. Enough to matter. That's not a number. $4,500 deposited in installments, clean, contractor basis, no traceable engagement. $4,500 was 3 months of breathing room. It was a winter coat and a security deposit and the eviction notice going into the recycling rather than the important pile. It was the particular relief of a number that doesn't solve everything, but creates enough distance from the edge to think clearly. Gavin didn't say yes immediately, because the people who say yes to things like this immediately are people who haven't fully understood what they're saying yes to. He sat with it for the length of time it took the rain to go from light to steady. Then he said, "Give me the dead drop protocol." I was back at the academy by 8:52, mop in hand, with a memorized set of instructions and a specific new weight behind his eyes that he recognized from a long time ago. The weight of carrying information that changes the geometry of every room you walk into. The gym was winding down. The last few members were in the locker rooms. The front desk staff was handling end-of-day inventory. The lights in the main floor had been turned to half power. The overnight mode that left the equipment in shadow and the exit signs doing their persistent red work in the corners. Gavin moved through the space differently now, though nothing about his movement would have looked different to anyone watching. The mop went where it went. The bucket rolled. His knee clicked. But his eyes were running a secondary process, cataloging, not for cleaning routes, but for the things Marco had described. Access points, camera coverage gaps, the particular flow pattern of who moved where and when. He had done this kind of reading before. It came back the way things come back when they've been trained deep enough. Not effortlessly, not without cost, but with the specific reliability of muscle memory that has been tested under conditions where failure meant something real. He was halfway through the main floor when he registered the voices from the direction of the private studio. The brothers were still here. He hadn't expected that. The studio light was on. He could see it under the door at the end of the equipment corridor. And the voices were distinct enough to be argument without being loud enough to carry words. He kept mopping, steady pace, route that happened to take him down the equipment corridor. As he got closer, the words separated from the noise. Logan's voice. I don't care what it looked like, Lan. I'm telling you what I saw. Landon, quieter, with the compressed quality of a man choosing his words specifically. What you saw was a guy who got lucky with a grip. He didn't get lucky with anything. He was toying with us. That's what I'm saying. You're saying a janitor was toying with us. I'm saying whoever that guy actually is was toying with us. A pause. Then Landon N, different quality to it. The resistance wearing thin. So what do you want to do about it? I want to know who he is. Gavin stopped the bucket at the junction of the corridor. He stood there and rinsed the mop head in the bucket water with the total unremarkability of a man doing his job. The studio door was 12 feet away. The gap at the bottom showed a horizontal sliver of light. Chase can run him, Landon said. Name, employment history, whatever. What's his last name? It's on the staff roster. Mercer, I think. Run him. Gavin listened to the sound of a decision being made. He kept the mop moving. The water in the bucket had gone gray and slightly foamy from the cleaning solution. He needed to swap it out before the back corridor, which meant a trip to the utility room near the service entrance, which would take him past the building manager's office on the ground floor. He filed this. He squeezed the mop head out, straightened, and rolled the bucket back toward the utility room. His face gave nothing. His pace didn't change. Behind him, the studio lights stayed on, and the voices continued at a register too low to read, and somewhere in the building, the security camera in the northeast corner of the main floor was pointed 7 degrees off center in a way that created a blind spot approximately 4 feet wide near the equipment corridor entrance, which was something Gavin had noticed during his regular cleaning route 3 weeks ago and filed as an interesting detail without knowing why. Now he knew why. He refilled the bucket at the utility room sink, running the water cold because the hot took 90 seconds to arrive, and he didn't have 90 seconds to spare. And he thought about Marco saying already invisible, and the particular bitterness of that being both a professional assessment and an accurate description of his life for the last 3 years. He thought about whether Chase would find anything significant running Gavin Mercer through whatever databases a rich man's personal assistant had access to. The answer was probably not. The Army record existed but was accessible only at a surface level. Rank, dates of service, discharge classification, which was honorable. The deeper material was behind clearance walls that a civilian background check wouldn't touch. His Portland life was a Portland life, utility bills, a lease agreement, a custodial employment record, one parking ticket from 2022. He looked like exactly what he looked like. That was by design, though not Marco's design, Gavin's own. The kind of camouflage you build deliberately when you come back from a war and realize the most valuable thing you can do is become unremarkable. He was mopping the back corridor when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize, local area code, no name. He let it go to voicemail, finished the corridor, wrung out the mop, leaned it against the wall, and pulled out his phone. The voicemail was 11 seconds long. The voice on it was not Marco's. It was a man's voice, older, unhurried, with the particular cadence of someone who is accustomed to being listened to and has never had a reason to doubt that this will continue. Mr. Mercer, my name is Harlan Goss. I own this building. I understand you had an interesting evening. I think we should have a conversation. I'll be in touch. The voicemail ended. Gavin stood in the back corridor with his phone in his hand and the mop against the wall, and the fluorescent tube somewhere behind him still stuttering its irregular pulse. And he understood several things at once. That the sweep Marco had mentioned was ongoing rather than completed, that Goss's network extended into the gym's daily operations more directly than Marco had indicated, and that someone in that private studio, either Chase or one of the brothers themselves, had made a call within the last hour that had arrived at a man who owned the building and had decided that the maintenance worker with the bad knee was worth a phone call. He was not invisible anymore. He didn't know yet whether that was a problem or an advantage. What he knew was that the $4,500 contractor arrangement had just become significantly more complicated, and the weight behind his eyes got heavier, and he stood there in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds. He counted, he always counted, before he put the phone in his pocket, picked up the mop, and went back to work. The next morning, Gavin dropped Emma at school 20 minutes early because she had a project due and needed the library, and he stood at the school's front entrance and watched her go through the doors without looking back, the way 7-year-olds do when they're focused on something specific and the world outside that focus simply ceases to register. She was wearing both sweatshirts, The outer one had a small paint stain near the left cuff from a Tuesday art class 2 weeks ago that hadn't fully washed out. He watched the door close behind her. Then he stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment with his hands in his jacket pockets and the eviction notice still folded in the inner pocket where it had been for 6 days, and he thought about Harlan Goss's voice on the voicemail, the particular quality of it, the absence of threat in the tone that was itself a kind of threat, the way certain men speak when they have enough infrastructure around them that they no longer need to be explicit about anything. I think we should have a conversation. Gavin had not called Marco last night. The dead drop protocol Marco had given him was a specific process, a draft email in a shared account, never sent, read, and deleted on a rotating schedule, and it was designed for deliberate information transfer rather than urgent contact. He had typed out a message and saved it to drafts at 11:15 p.m. Goss made direct contact, voicemail. He has my name and number. Timeline may be compressed. Then he'd closed the laptop and looked at the ceiling of his apartment for a while before deciding that looking at the ceiling was not productive and going to sleep. He had slept 4 hours. This was normal. I was at the academy by 9:40, which was earlier than his shift required because the building manager's office was only staffed from 9 a.m. and he needed something from it that his regular cleaning duties would justify. The building manager was a woman named Soo Yeon Park, mid-40s, efficient, with the specific economy of movement that comes from managing a large commercial property alone and learning that every wasted motion costs time she doesn't have. She was not warm, exactly, but she was fair, which Gavin had found more reliable than warm across the months he'd been here. He knocked on the open door. She looked up from a monitor covered in spreadsheet columns. Mercer. Morning. I need to swap out the tube in the northeast corridor on 2. It's been flickering for 2 weeks and I've had it on the report list, but nothing's come through. She looked at the monitor, looked at him. Supply closet has replacements. You know where they are? I do. I also need the utility key for the electrical panel on that level. The replacement requires the panel access. She considered this for approximately 1 second, not suspicion, just the natural processing time of a person who manages keys and access points as part of her job, and then opened the top drawer of her desk, which held a keyboard, and removed a tagged key without getting up. Back by end of shift, she said. Always, as Gavin said. He took the key. The key accessed not only the electrical panel on level 2, but also, because of an idiosyncrasy in how the building's access system had been consolidated during a renovation 4 years ago, the server room adjacent to the building management office on the ground floor. This was documented in the maintenance manual that Gavin had read thoroughly during his second week of employment, partly out of professional habit, and partly because reading the operational documentation of any space he inhabited was something he did automatically and couldn't entirely turn off. He went to get the fluorescent tube first. The flickering light needed to actually be replaced. He wasn't going to use the access as a pretext and leave the reported maintenance item unaddressed. That was the kind of detail that created questions later. The replacement took 8 minutes. The tube came out clean, the new one seated without trouble, and the corridor went from stuttering yellow to steady white. Gavin stood below it for a moment and looked at the light the way you look at something fixed, with the minor satisfaction of a problem that is now no longer a problem. Then he took the key to the server room. What Marco needed specifically, what he had communicated through the dead drop in the week before Gavin answered his call, was confirmation of a particular device. Goss's network used the building's legitimate IT infrastructure as a pass-through, routing communication through the Academy's commercial internet service in a way that was designed to look like normal business traffic. The device that managed this routing was described as a modified commercial router with specific hardware additions. Marco had given him a photograph and a physical description, dimensions and indicator light configuration, and it would be located either in the server room or in the building manager's office network cabinet. The server room was small, climate-controlled, smelling of electronics and cold air. Gavin had been in it twice before for legitimate maintenance access. It held 2 server racks, a UPS system, and a wall-mounted network cabinet that served the building's commercial tenants. He found the device in 4 minutes. It was exactly where Marco's description had predicted. Third shelf of the network cabinet, between a commercial firewall unit and a patch panel, sitting flush against the back wall in a way that made it look incidental. The indicator lights were the configuration from the photograph. The hardware additions Marco had described were visible if you knew to look for them. An additional port cluster on the rear panel that wasn't part of the commercial model's standard build. Gavin looked at it for 10 seconds. He did not touch it. He did not photograph it. He had nothing to photograph it with that wouldn't create a record he didn't want to create. He memorized the indicator light sequence, the cable routing, the position of the additional hardware relative to the unit's serial number label. Then he left the server room, locked it, and went to return the key to Suyon Park. On the way back down the corridor, he passed the Pierce brothers' private studio, which was empty at this hour. The lights were off. Through the glass, he could see the mats, the equipment, the framed photographs on the solid wall. The room looked smaller with no one in it. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Same local area code as last night. He answered it this time. Mr. Mercer. Harlan Goss. Same voice, same unhurried quality. I'm glad you picked up. What can I do for you, Mr. Goss? A brief pause, the kind that acknowledges the directness rather than being unsettled by it. I'd like to meet. Today, if you're available. I have an office on the 4th floor of the building. You may not have been up there. Most of the staff hasn't. 3 o'clock. I work until 4. I'll speak with Ms. Park. You won't lose the hours. Another pause. I've heard good things about your work ethic, and I've heard about your evening with the Pierce brothers. Talented young men, but occasionally limited in their perspective. Something in his tone shifted slightly, an adjustment of warmth that felt calibrated rather than genuine. I think you might be underutilized here, Mr. Mercer. I'd like to discuss that. The corridor was empty in both directions. The new fluorescent tube hummed cleanly overhead. 3 o'clock, Gavin said. I'll have someone meet you at the elevator. The call ended. Gavin stood with the phone at his side for a moment, then pocketed it and continued toward the building manager's office. He returned the key. He filled out the maintenance completion form for the tube replacement. He did all of this with the same steady pace and unremarkable demeanor that had made him invisible in this building for 8 months. Inside, something had shifted. Not fear. Something more specific than fear. The particular state of heightened attention that precedes a situation where the variables are known to be present but not yet fully visible. He had felt it in other buildings, in other corridors, in the particular seconds before a door opened onto something that wasn't what you expected. His body recognized it and responded the same way it always had, not by accelerating, but by going very, very still underneath the surface. He sent a draft email at 12:45 from the break room on his phone. Direct meeting requested. Goss. Today, 1500. 4th floor office. Going in. He ate a sandwich from the break room vending machine and drank a coffee that had been sitting in the pot for at least 2 hours. And he thought about Emma's paint-stained sweatshirt and the specific calculation of a man who has very little margin for error. At 2:58, he took the elevator to the 4th floor. He had cleaned this floor once, in his 2nd week, when the regular 4th floor service crew was short-staffed. He remembered it as being different from the floors below. Quieter, with fewer office suites and wider corridors, the kind of layout that indicated tenants who valued privacy over density. The academy occupied floors 1 through 3. The 4th floor was separate commercial space, nominally a consulting firm called Meridian Advisory Partners, which had a frosted glass front entrance and a reception desk that was staffed by a single person during business hours. The elevator opened, and the single person at the reception desk was not the woman Gavin had seen on his one previous visit, but a man, 30s, solid build under a business casual jacket, the particular way of sitting in a chair that said the chair was not his natural habitat. He stood when Gavin got off the elevator. Mr. Mercer, I'll take you back. Gavin followed him through the frosted glass door and down a short interior corridor to a corner office. The man knocked twice, opened the door, and stood aside. Harlan Goss was seated behind a desk that was cleaner than working desks usually are, the kind of clean that suggested the real work happened elsewhere. He was 63 but looked older in person than Gavin had expected from Marco's description. Thinner, with the slightly hollowed quality of a man who has been under sustained stress for long enough that it has begun to show in his structure rather than just his expression. His hair was white and worn short. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, and had his hands folded on the desk in a way that was either naturally relaxed or very practiced at appearing so. He gestured to the chair across the desk. Mr. Mercer, sit down. Gavin sat. The man who had brought him back took a position near the door. Not at the door, near it. Close enough to be present, far enough to seem incidental. Gavin clocked him in his peripheral vision and filed him. Right-handed, weight slightly favored to the left foot, jacket that fit well except across the right shoulder where it pulled slightly when he moved, which suggested something under it. "Thank you for coming," Goss said. "You said I'd keep the hours." Goss looked at him for a moment. Not offended, assessing. The look of a man who is deciding whether the directness is genuine or performed. "Yes, you will." He unfolded his hands and leaned back slightly. "I'll be direct with you, Mr. Mercer. I know something about your background. Not everything. Your record is sparse in ways that suggest intention rather than accident, but enough to know that your presence in this building in your current capacity represents a significant gap between what you are and what you're doing here." Gavin said nothing. "That gap interests me," Goss said. "I have a business that requires certain kinds of people, capable people. People who are accustomed to operating in environments where the rules are flexible and the stakes are real." He paused. "The Pierce brothers were very impressed by you, incidentally, Logan in particular." "I cleaned their gym." "You put both of them on the mat inside of 90 seconds, which is not a thing most people who clean gyms can do." Goss's expression didn't change. "I'm not interested in pretending I don't know what I know. That's inefficient for both of us." A beat of silence. Outside the window behind Goss, Portland's gray skyline sat in the cloud layer like something muted and patient. "What are you offering?" Gavin said. "A role, specific, compensated, requiring your actual capabilities rather than your mop." Goss opened a desk drawer and produced an envelope, thicker than the one from Logan last night. He set it on the desk without pushing it across. "This is a consideration, a gesture of good faith, while we discuss specifics." Gavin looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. "What would the role involve?" "Protection, facilitation, occasionally presence in situations where the presence of a capable person resolves ambiguity before it becomes a problem." Goss's voice was even, calibrated. "I have a transaction that requires physical oversight next week. Straightforward. Experienced people make it simple." "Physical oversight of what?" "Goods and documentation. In transit." "Where?" "Port of Portland. Evening of the 14th. Gavin held Goss's gaze. The man near the door shifted his weight slightly. Not a move, just the small adjustment of a person who has been standing still too long. The pulled shoulder of his jacket shifted with it. "I'd need more specifics before I agreed to anything," Gavin said. "Of course." Goss nodded, as if this were expected and reasonable. "We can discuss specifics at a second meeting if you're interested in principle. What I need today is whether you're interested in principle." The office was quiet except for the building's HVAC system, which ran at a pitch slightly too high to fully tune out. Gavin sat with the question for the length of time that felt like genuine consideration and was genuine consideration, because the calculation he was running involved more variables than Goss knew about. Marco needed the device confirmed. Done. Marco needed information about the transaction. Goss had just handed him a date, a location, and a category. The 14th. Port of Portland. Documentation. Goods. If he said no, he was back to being a janitor, and the access dried up. If he said yes, he was inside the operation with a front-row view of the transaction that Marco's network had been watching for 11 months. The thing about being in position was that being in position meant something different. When the person you were gathering intelligence on was actively trying to recruit you. "In principle," Gavin said. "Yes." Goss smiled then, not warmly, but with the specific satisfaction of a man who has correctly identified a resource and secured access to it. He pushed the envelope across the desk. "Take this. Think about specifics. We'll meet again Thursday." He paused. "And Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your discretion. People in your situation understand that certain conversations stay in certain rooms." "I understand that," Gavin said. He picked up the envelope and stood. The man near the door moved to open it. Gavin walked through, down the interior corridor, through the frosted glass, past the reception desk, and into the elevator. The doors closed. He stood in the descending elevator and held the envelope and felt the weight behind his eyes press against the front of his skull with a new and specific urgency, because he had just committed to something that had multiple exits and he had not yet decided which one he was going to take. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened into the main academy lobby where the afternoon membership crowd was starting to arrive. People in gym bags coming through the main entrance, the desk staff greeting them, the smell of the floor cleaner he'd applied this morning still faintly present in the air near the entrance corridor. Gavin walked through it all, past the front desk, down the main corridor, into the equipment hallway, back to where the mop bucket was parked outside the utility room, waiting with its cracked handle mop like a patient, an indifferent witness to whatever was going to happen next. He was pulling on his gloves to resume cleaning when he heard the footsteps behind him, fast, multiple, coming from the main floor direction with the kind of pace that wasn't angry but was decided, which was sometimes worse. He turned. It was Logan Pierce. Behind him, two men Gavin had never seen before, not gym members, not staff. Both wearing jackets despite the indoor warmth. Both moving with the specific deliberateness of people who have been told to be somewhere and are being somewhere. Logan's expression was complicated. Not hostile, something more unsettled than that. Gavin. He stopped 6 feet away. The two men with him stopped a half step behind. I need to talk to you. I'm working. I know, this is... Logan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that on someone this composed meant the composure was costing him something. Chase ran your name last night, like Lon said. Okay. There wasn't much, which was... He stopped, recalibrated. Gavin, I need to know if you just came from the 4th floor. The equipment corridor was narrow. The bucket was to Gavin's left. The utility room door was behind him. The two men with Logan were filling the corridor in a way that wasn't aggressive but was definitely structural. They were positioned across the width of the space in a way that created a specific geometry. Gavin registered all of this without his expression changing. Why does that matter to you? He said. Logan looked at him for a long moment. The thing in his expression that wasn't hostility was, Gavin now understood, something closer to fear, but not fear of Gavin. Fear adjacent to Gavin. The fear of a man who has realized he is standing near something that has been set in motion and he does not know if he is in its path. Because Harlan Goss, Logan said carefully, as though the name itself required handling, is not a person you want to be in business with. And if he called you up there today... He stopped. His jaw worked. Landon and I have been trying to exit a situation for 8 months that we got into without understanding what it was. And if he's pulling you in... Logan... Gavin's voice was quiet and flat. Not threatening, just load-bearing. The voice of a man communicating that he requires precision, not explanation. Logan stopped. How deep are you in? Gavin said. The two men behind Logan exchanged a look. Logan looked at Gavin with the exhausted expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that the relief of putting it down is almost greater than the fear of what happens when you do. Deep enough, he said, that I don't know who to trust, and I'm standing in a supply closet hallway telling the guy who mopped this floor this morning because I've run out of better options. The fluorescent tube above them hummed its clean, steady new hum. Gavin looked at Logan Pierce, the expensive watch, the gym clothes, the 8 months of not understanding what the building he trained in actually was, and made a decision that he knew, as he made it, was going to make the next 72 hours significantly more complicated than the $4,500 arrangement he had agreed to the night before. Come with me, Gavin said. He turned and opened the utility room door. After a moment, Logan followed him in. The two men with him started to follow, and Gavin looked at them over his shoulder without stopping. Not them, he said. They stopped. Gavin pulled the utility room door closed behind Logan and stood in the chemical smell and the close space and the single hanging bulb, and he said, Tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't clean it up. Logan leaned against the shelf of cleaning supplies and looked at the floor for a moment. Then he started talking. His voice was steady, in the way of someone who has rehearsed this in their head many times and is finally saying it to an actual person. And some of what he said confirmed things Gavin already knew from Marco. And some of it didn't, and the parts that didn't were the parts that made Gavin's jaw tighten, in the particular way it tightened when a situation was larger than the person briefing him had understood it to be. By the time Logan finished, the hanging bulb above them cast both of their shadows long and crooked against the utility shelves. And Gavin understood that the transaction on the 14th was not what Marco had described it as, and that the documentation Goss had referred to as goods and documentation was a description that significantly undersold what was actually moving through the port of Portland in 9 days, and that Logan Pierce, who had started as a punching bag session and become a complication and was now something that required an entirely new category, was either the most useful person Gavin had encountered in this building or the most dangerous one. He hadn't decided which yet. He needed Marco. Tonight. Not a draft email. A real conversation, whatever the protocol cost. He looked at Logan. "You don't talk to your brother about this conversation," he said. "Not yet." Logan blinked. "Landon is—" "Not yet." Gavin held his eyes. "Can you do that?" A long pause, the kind that measures whether a person has the discipline to do something that runs against their instinct. Logan held the look, and then looked away, and then looked back. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." Gavin opened the utility room door. The corridor outside was empty. The two men had moved off somewhere, which was either good or bad, and he didn't have enough information to determine which. He stepped out and picked up the mop handle. The crack in it ran 3 inches along the grain of the wood, exactly where it had always been. He went back to work. His hands were steady. His face was neutral. His mind was running at a speed that had nothing to do with cleaning schedules, and the weight behind his eyes had compressed into something dense and specific and very, very focused. The kind of focus that had kept him functional in Kunar province when the situation was bigger than the briefing and the only available tool was the person he already was. Somewhere above him, on the 4th floor, Harlan Goss was sitting behind his clean desk with his folded hands and his calibrated warmth, believing he had just recruited a useful asset. He was right about the useful part. He was wrong about everything else. He called Marco at 9:17 p.m., standing outside on the building's service dock with the door propped open behind him, and the rain coming down in the particular steady way it does in Portland in November. Not dramatic, just relentless. The kind of rain that doesn't care whether you have an umbrella. He used the number Marco had given him for emergencies, which was a different number from the one Marco had called him on 2 nights ago, and it rang 4 times before Marco picked up with the specific silence of someone who has seen the caller ID and is deciding how to frame what comes next. "You're breaking protocol," Marco said. "Logan Pierce told me about the cargo." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm that Marco knew what cargo Gavin meant. "Where are you?" "Service dock, south side." "Stay there." The call ended. Gavin stood in the overhang's partial shelter and watched the rain hit the alley pavement and thought about what Logan had said in the utility room. Said it in the particular order Logan had said it, because order mattered, because the sequence in which a person reveals information tells you as much as the information itself. Logan had started with the LLC structure, which meant he'd been sitting with the financial piece longest. He'd gotten to the cargo description almost as an afterthought, which meant either he didn't fully understand its significance or he did, and was testing whether Gavin did. Gavin had understood its significance immediately and had kept his face neutral while understanding it, which was a skill that had taken years to develop and cost more than he could accurately measure. The gray rental SUV appeared at the alley entrance 12 minutes later. It pulled to the dock and Marco got out while it was still rocking from the stop, moving with the brisk economy of a man for whom standing in rain is a minor variable and not a condition. He came under the overhang, looked at Gavin. "Tell me what he said." "Exactly." "He said the transaction on the 14th isn't documentation supporting weapons procurement. The documentation is the weapons procurement, specifically export certificates and end-user documentation for a category of drone components, navigation integration hardware, that is controlled under ITAR and has been flagged by 3 separate allied intelligence services as a priority interdiction target because the buyer is not who the certificates say the buyer is." Marco's expression didn't change. It also didn't relax, which was the tell. "You knew," Gavin said. "We knew the category. We didn't know the specific components or the certification mechanism." Logan knew the specific components. Logan Pierce is 28 years older than his business experience and has been sitting on this for 8 months because Goss holds paper on 3 of their company's key acquisitions. Marco turned and looked at the rain for a moment. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something more direct. "How much does the younger brother know?" Everything Logan knows. They share information. Logan just doesn't know Logan told me yet. And Landon. I don't know where Landon's head is. Logan implied Landon has been trying to find a way out through Goss's own network, which if true means he's been making contact that Goss knows about and Logan doesn't know Landon is making. Marco processed this. He had a way of processing things that looked like stillness but wasn't. You could see it in the small movements around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. He was running a tree of implications and their second and third order consequences, which Gavin recognized because he was running the same tree. The protocol changes, Marco said finally. Yes. The 14th is 9 days. If Goss believes you're his asset, and Logan Pierce has now also disclosed to you, you're the only person currently in contact with both sides of this who isn't either committed to Goss or trying to find the door. I know. That makes you load-bearing in a way the original arrangement didn't account for. I know that too. Marco looked at him steadily. The rain came off the overhang edge in a thin sheet 6 inches in front of them. The 4,500... I don't care about the 4,500, Gavin said. I care about the 14th. I care about what happens to Logan Pierce if Goss figures out he talked. And I care about finishing my shift tonight and picking up my daughter from her mother's tomorrow morning and not having this thing extend past the window you actually need it to extend. Marco held his look. Those things may not all be compatible. They rarely are. What's the play? The play, as Marco laid it out against the overhang wall with the rain providing cover for their voices, required 3 things. Gavin maintaining his position with Goss through Thursday's second meeting, Logan Pierce agreeing to a controlled disclosure protocol that would require him to sign paperwork he wasn't going to like, and a technical team accessing the server room device Gavin had confirmed to install monitoring firmware that would capture the routing pattern of Goss's network communication in the 10 days leading to the transaction. The third element was the one Gavin pushed back on. If your technical team comes into this building, Goss's people will see it, Gavin said. You said yourself they swept 2 months ago. They're running active surveillance on building access. We go in as HVAC contractors. We have cover documentation. It won't hold. Goss had my name and number within 2 hours of me putting 2 of his members on a gym mat. That's not a passive security posture, Marco. He has eyes inside this building's daily operation that are faster than your cover documentation. Marco stopped. He didn't argue this, which meant he'd already considered it and hadn't liked his answer. So you're saying you go in, Marco said. I already have the access. I've been in that room. I know the device location and the cabinet layout. Give me the firmware device and tell me what port it goes in, and I'm in and out in 4 minutes during a cleaning rotation that puts me in that corridor anyway. You're not a technician. It's a USB device into a specific port. How much of a technician do I need to be? Marco looked at the alley. Somewhere down the block, a dumpster lid banged in the wind, a flat metallic sound that bounced off the brick walls. If it's found, I'm the maintenance guy who plugged something into a server because someone told him to and he didn't know what it was. Gavin met his eyes. I've been the person who doesn't know what he's doing for 8 months. I'm good at it. Another silence. Marco pulled out the unbranded phone and typed something, waited, typed something else. Then he poxed it. Thursday morning, before your shift. I'll have the device for you. Leave it in the draft account. I'll leave instructions in the draft account. The device goes in a package to your building's service delivery address. Labeled as replacement network hardware, invoiced to a company Goss's people will recognize as a legitimate vendor. It arrives Wednesday. Gavin nodded. This was the kind of operational detail Marco was good at. The architecture of legitimacy, the scaffolding of normal that made abnormal things possible. He'd watched Marco build this kind of structure in much harsher environments than a Portland commercial building, and he trusted the construction even when he didn't love what the structure was for. Logan Pierce, Gavin said. What happens to him? If he cooperates with disclosure, what actually happens to him? Not the policy answer. Marco looked at him. He had the grace not to give the policy answer. He testifies to a federal grand jury. The acquisitions Goss holds paper on get reviewed and possibly frozen during the investigation. His company takes damage that may be significant depending on how long the review runs. He and his brother are looking at 18 months minimum of legal process regardless of outcome. And if he doesn't cooperate, then he's a witness rather than a cooperating party, which is worse for him legally and personally and doesn't actually improve his outcome in any meaningful way. Gavin thought about Logan in the utility room, leaning against the cleaning supply shelf, the posture of a man who has been carrying weight until his posture has changed around it. 8 months of knowing what he was adjacent to and not knowing how to get out without destroying what he'd built. "I'll talk to him," Gavin said, "before Thursday." "Gavin," Marco's voice had a different quality in it now. Not softer exactly, but more considered. The voice of a man saying something he has decided to say rather than something the situation is pulling out of him. "I want to be clear about something. What you're doing here. This isn't what I brought you in for. The original ask was observation and access support. This has moved past that, and it moved past it because of decisions you made, some of which I'd have made differently. I know. The meeting with Goss today was necessary. It created exposure. It created information. There's a difference." Gavin looked at him steadily. "The meeting with Goss told me the timeline, the location, the category, and the fact that he's confident enough to recruit openly, which means he believes his network security is solid. Logan told me the network security isn't solid because Landon has been making contact Goss knows about. Those two pieces together tell you that Goss is running a controlled burn on Landon Pierce and waiting to see who Landon talks to." He paused. "You need to know if Landon has been talking to your people." Marco went very still. "Has he?" Gavin said. The rain ran off the overhang. Down the alley, the dumpster lid settled. "There was a contact," Marco said carefully. 3 weeks ago. Indirect. We assessed it as an exploratory. Goss knows about it." Gavin watched Marco's expression process this. "Which means Goss has been watching to see where that contact goes. Which means everything Landon has said to anyone in the last 3 weeks has potentially been fed back. We ran him through a sterile channel. Marco." Gavin said it the way you say someone's name when you need them to hear the thing they don't want to hear. "Goss had my name inside 2 hours. He had my phone number. The channel wasn't sterile. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a competent person absorbing a failure in their own operation. Marco was good enough not to deflect it. He stood with it for a moment, jaw tight, and then he nodded once. A small, precise movement. "I need to make a call," he said. "Make it. I'm going back inside." Gavin pulled the service door open. The gym smell rolled out, floor cleaner and recycled air, and the particular staleness of a building that has been running its HVAC system on a closed loop all day. "Gavin," Marco said it to his back. Gavin stopped but didn't turn. "The reason I called you specifically," Marco said, "it wasn't just because you were in position. There are other people I could have put in a building. It was because you think like this, the way you just laid that out." A pause. "I need you to know I didn't burn you intentionally with the Landon channel." Gavin stood in the doorway with the rain behind him and the gym smell in front of him. He thought about what it cost to say that and what it cost to hear it. "I know you didn't," he said, and went inside. He found Logan the next morning, not at the gym. He'd thought about that, decided against it. Whatever was watching the building's daily operations would register a sustained conversation between Gavin and a member as a pattern worth noting, and patterns worth noting were things Gavin was currently working to avoid. He texted Logan from a different number, a prepaid he'd picked up at a drugstore on his way home the previous night, paid cash, $30. The kind of transaction that existed in no record connected to his name. The text said, "Coffee. Tomorrow. 7 a.m. The place on Burnside you used to like before you could afford better." He'd seen a loyalty card from that coffee shop fall out of Logan's jacket 3 weeks ago during a session, picked it up, set it on the equipment bench without comment. Logan had palmed it without acknowledging it. Logan showed up at 6:58 in running clothes and the look of a man who has not slept adequately. Gavin was already there. He had a coffee. He did not get one for Logan, which would have required giving his name at the counter, and he was not going to give his name at the counter. Logan ordered his own and sat across from Gavin in the corner booth with the wooden back that blocked the sightline from the street window. "You could have just texted," Logan said. "I did text. I mean, asked me here in the text. You didn't have to be cryptic." "I wasn't being cryptic. I was being careful." Gavin looked at him. "There's a difference. You need to start understanding that difference." Logan wrapped both hands around his cup. He looked tired in a deep way. Not sleep-deprived, but worn, the fatigue of sustained anxiety that has been running under everything for months. "Okay," he said. "I'm listening." Gavin laid it out. Not everything. Not Marco. Not the network watch. Not the firmware device or the server room. What he gave Logan was the structure. That Goss's operation was under serious outside scrutiny, that the transaction on the 14th was not going to complete as planned, that Logan's position in the next 9 days would determine his position in the next several years. Logan listened without interrupting, which took visible effort. "You're saying federal," Logan said when Gavin stopped. "I'm saying the category of components in that shipment is ITR-controlled export. That's federal by definition. The question isn't whether federal involvement is coming, it's where you're standing when it arrives." Logan looked at his coffee. "Landon doesn't know you're telling me this." "No." "Does Landon know—" He stopped. "How much trouble is Lon in?" This was the question Gavin had been waiting for and had been deciding how to answer since the night before. The honest answer was more than Logan knew, possibly more than Landon knew, because a man who makes exploratory contact with an investigation and doesn't know that contact has been observed is a man who has given his adversary a roadmap without receiving anything in return. "Your brother has been trying to find his own way out," Gavin said. "The way he's been trying hasn't been clean." Logan processed this. His jaw worked slightly. "Define not clean." "He's been in contact with people who are trying to build a case against Goss. Those contacts may have been observed. If they were, Goss knows Landon is looking for an exit and has been managing that knowledge rather than responding to it, which means Goss has a use for your brother that your brother doesn't know about." The coffee shop was quiet at this hour. 2 students with laptops, a man reading a physical newspaper, the barista wiping down equipment, normal morning ambient noise. Nothing in it that was relevant to the 2 men in the corner booth. Logan put his coffee down. He pressed the heels of his hands against the table edge and looked at a point somewhere between them. "He's going to burn Lan," Logan said. Not a question. The tone of someone who has just watched 2 unconnected facts assemble into an explanation. "That's my read." "As what? Leverage? A sacrificial—" "As documentation," Gavin said. "If the transaction gets scrutinized, having a record of one of the building's prominent members attempting to contact investigators makes that member look like the source of the leak. It redirects attention. It buys time. Landon didn't leak anything. He doesn't know enough to— He doesn't need to have actually leaked anything. He needs to appear to have. Goss has the contact record. That's sufficient for the delay he needs." Logan sat back. He looked at Gavin with an expression that had moved through several things and arrived at something that was partly fury and partly the specific helplessness of realizing you've been outmaneuvered in a game you didn't know had rules. "What do I do?" he said. It came out with less composure than Logan probably intended, raw at the edges, the question of a man who is done performing. "You and your brother talk, today. You tell him what you told me yesterday, and you tell him I'm the one you told. No filtering, no version management. He needs the accurate picture." "He's going to—" Logan stopped himself. "He'll think I went behind his back." "You did go behind his back. I know that. Tell him that too." Gavin picked up his coffee. "The version where you didn't go behind his back is less useful to him than the true version. He needs accurate information more than he needs to feel that the 2 of you are aligned." Logan sat with this. Outside the window, Portland was doing its morning thing. People moving with that particular purposeful speed of people who have somewhere to be and not quite enough time to get there comfortably. Buses, cyclists, the city's ordinary machinery running in the gray light. "You're not just a janitor," Logan said finally. "I'm exactly a janitor," Gavin said. "A janitor who is trying to prevent your family from getting destroyed by a situation you walked into without a map. Keep the categories clean." "That's not what I know what you meant." Gavin set down his cup. "It doesn't matter what I was before. It matters what happens in the next 9 days. Focus there." Logan looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that people give when they're committing something to memory. Not the details, but the shape of a person, the outline. Gavin had been looked at this way before, in very different rooms. It never meant entirely the same thing twice. "Okay," Logan said. "I'll talk to Landon today." "Before noon." "Before noon." Gavin stood, dropped a folded bill on the table for the tip, a habit, always cash, always enough, and pulled on his jacket. "One more thing," he said. "If Goss contacts you or Landon before Thursday, you respond normally. Nothing has changed from your side. You're still in the same position you were yesterday. Can you do that?" Logan thought about it honestly, rather than answering fast, which was the right instinct. "Landon's better at that than I am," he said. "Then let Landon handle the responses. You stay out of direct contact with Goss until I tell you otherwise." Gavin looked at him. "This only works if nobody improvises." "Got it. I mean that specifically. Nobody improvises." "I heard you." Gavin left the coffee shop without looking back. The morning air hit him cold and damp, and he walked the 2 blocks to the transit stop and stood on the platform with his hands in his jacket pockets and thought about all the ways the next 9 days could fail, because cataloging the failure modes was how you tried to prevent them. And prevention was almost always better than response. And he had learned that at a cost he still carried in his knee and his shoulder and the 4 hours of sleep that was usually all he could manage. The bus arrived 7 minutes late, which was normal, and Gavin found a seat by the window and watched Portland move past in the gray morning light and thought about Emma's paint-stained sweatshirt and the envelope from Goss sitting on his kitchen counter and the firmware device that would arrive Wednesday in a package addressed to the building's service entrance. He thought about Marco's voice saying, "You think like this," in the way someone says something they've been deciding whether to say. He thought about the cracked mop handle. Then the bus turned onto his transfer route, and he stopped thinking about things he couldn't control at the moment and started thinking about what he could, which was the Thursday meeting with Goss, the exact words he'd use, the specific demeanor, neither too eager nor too reluctant, that would maintain his position inside Goss's assessment of him while the operation Marco was running completed its last stage. He had 3 days. He'd worked with less. Wednesday morning, the package arrived at the service entrance at 11:40, labeled Network Replacement Hardware, Meridian Advisory Partners, on a packing slip from a vendor that Gavin did not recognize, but that the building's delivery log would show as a recurring supplier for the 4th-floor tenant. Gavin signed for it. His name went into the delivery log in his normal handwriting because it was supposed to be there, because he received deliveries as part of his job, because nothing about this was supposed to be remarkable. He carried the package to the utility room and opened it with a box cutter. Inside the foam padding, nested beside a completely legitimate-looking network component that would go to the 4th floor as documentation, if anyone ever asked, was a USB device approximately the size of a thumb drive, matte black, with a single indicator light and a small adhesive label on which someone had written in block letters, P3, rear, port 3, rear panel. He'd confirmed the port cluster position when he'd been in the server room. He put the device in his shirt pocket. Then he resealed the outer packaging, took the inner component up to the 4th floor's service delivery box in the corridor outside Meridian Advisory, and went back downstairs. He waited until 2 p.m. when the building's traffic pattern put most staff in a post-lunch lull and the server room corridor was empty on its natural rotation. He used the utility key, returned and reborrowed, logged as needed for a network cabinet labeling task that was on the maintenance list, and went in. 4 minutes, as estimated. Port 3, rear panel. The device seated with a soft click. The indicator light went from dark to a brief amber pulse and then off, which the instructions in the draft email had specified as correct insertion confirmation. He left the server room, locked it, returned the key. He was mopping the main floor corridor at 2:23 when his phone buzzed with a text from the prepaid number Marco used for simple confirmations. It said, "Signal confirmed. Good. 2 words. Gavin read them and put the phone away and kept mopping. The floor was clean by 3 p.m. He moved on to the equipment alcoves, then the locker rooms, then the back corridor where the fluorescent tube was still running clean and steady. At 4:01 he clocked out, said the standard nothing to fill, who sighed in acknowledgement, and walked out through the service entrance into the late afternoon. It was not raining. This was unusual enough that he noticed it. The sky was still gray, but the rain had paused, and the wet pavement from the morning was drying in patches, the city's surfaces doing their slow work of returning to baseline. He had been walking for half a block when a car pulled to the curb beside him. Not Marco's gray rental. A different vehicle, black, domestic, the particular anonymous quality of a car that has been chosen to not be noticed. The rear window came down, and the man inside was not someone Gavin had expected to see, because the man inside was someone who was supposed to be in Tucson and had been described to Gavin as a gym member with a family emergency, but who was now sitting in the back of a black car with an expression that was several degrees more serious than any expression Gavin had seen him wear on a gym mat. "Get in," said Landon Pierce. Gavin stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment. "Where's your brother?" he said. Landon's expression didn't change. "Get in the car, Gavin. Please." The please carried weight that the rest of the sentence didn't. The weight of a man who has just had a conversation he cannot unhave, and who has arrived at the far side of it changed, and who needs the next conversation to go differently than the last several have. Gavin got in the car, the window went up, the car pulled from the curb, and Landon Pierce looked at the back of the driver's headrest for a moment before turning to Gavin with the expression of a man who has finally, at significant cost, decided to stop managing the truth and just tell it. "Logan talked to me," he said. "I know what you told him. I know what you know." He paused. "I also know something you don't, and you need to hear it before Thursday." The car moved through the afternoon streets, and Gavin looked at Landon Pierce. The shorter hair, the forward weight, the posture that was usually aggressive and was now something else entirely, and understood that the next 9 days had just reorganized themselves around a new center, and that whatever Landon was about to say was going to change the shape of everything that came after. "Talk," Gavin said. Landon Pierce talked for 19 minutes without stopping. Gavin counted, not precisely, but close enough, tracking by the blocks the car moved through as the driver navigated the afternoon streets in the particular aimless pattern of a vehicle that needs to keep moving without arriving anywhere. 19 minutes of Landon's voice in the close air of the back seat, steady and stripped of the competitive edge that was usually its baseline quality. The voice of a man who has finally put down something heavy enough that the relief and the terror of it are arriving simultaneously. The thing Gavin didn't know, the thing that reorganized everything. 6 weeks ago, Landon had met directly with Harlan Goss. Not a standard building owner meeting, a specific documented recorded meeting, recorded by Landon, on a device he'd worn, with the audio subsequently transferred to an encrypted drive that was currently sitting in a safety deposit box at a credit union in Northeast Portland under a name that was not his own. He had recorded Goss describing, in the calibrated and unhurried voice that Gavin recognized from his own conversations with the man, the full structure of the transaction on the 14th, the components, the false end-user certificates, the name of the Vancouver broker, the routing through the port, and one additional piece that was not in anything Marco had briefed, a second transaction, smaller, 6 weeks after the 14th, involving a different category of controlled technology entirely, with a buyer whose name Landon said quietly and without emphasis in the back of the moving car, and which landed in the space between them like something that had weight and heat. Gavin knew that name, not personally, from briefings that were years old now, from a context that was supposed to be behind him, from the specific texture of information that stays in your memory, because the stakes attached to it were the kind that don't let you look away. "Say that name again," Gavin said. Landon said it again. Gavin sat with it for 3 seconds. Then, "The recording, is it intact?" "Yes." "You haven't played it for anyone?" "No, I contacted an investigative journalist 3 months ago, anonymously. I pulled back before I sent anything." "Why?" Landon looked out the window. The city moved past in the early evening gray. "Because I wasn't sure it would land in the right place. Because I didn't know who was connected to what. Because Goss holds paper on 2 of our core acquisitions, and if those get frozen during any kind of investigation, 43 people who work for us lose their jobs." He turned back. His expression had none of the polish it usually carried. "Because I was scared and I kept making the calculation that the timing wasn't right, and then 6 months passed." Gavin looked at him without judgment and without reassurance, because neither was what the situation needed. "Logan told you I know people who can use that recording," he said. "Logan told me you're not what you've been pretending to be. I made the inference." Landon held his eyes. "Are we right?" The car moved through an intersection. A bus crossed in front of them, its lit windows full of the ordinary people having their ordinary evenings. "I need to make a call," Gavin said. He called Marco from the back seat with Landon present, which was a protocol violation and also the only workable option because the recording changed the timeline in ways that the dead drop cycle couldn't accommodate. Marco picked up on the second ring. "There's a recording," Gavin said. "Goss, 6 weeks ago, direct disclosure, the 14th and a secondary transaction, and a name on the secondary buyer that you need to hear." He said the name. The silence on Marco's end was 4 seconds long, which from Marco was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. "Who has it?" "Landon Pierce, encrypted drive. Safety deposit box, NE Portland." "Is he willing?" "He's sitting next to me." Another pause. Then Marco, speaking with the particular precision of someone restructuring a plan in real time. "I need that recording by tomorrow morning, not a copy. The original device, chain of custody intact, transferred directly. Can that happen?" Gavin looked at Landon. Landon had heard enough of the call to understand the question. He looked at the back of the driver's headrest for a moment. A man checking whether he actually means what he's about to say, rather than just whether he can say it convincingly. "Yes," Landon said. "It can happen." Gavin relayed this. Marco said he'd have a contact location in the draft account within the hour. Then he said, "Gavin, the Thursday meeting with Goss, don't go." "If I don't go, he knows something shifted. The recording changes the operational posture. We don't need your access anymore, and we can't risk Goss reading you differently than he has been. The meeting is unnecessary exposure." Missing the meeting is also exposure. He'll move the timeline or change the port of call if he thinks something is wrong. Gavin kept his voice level. "I go Thursday. I maintain the relationship through Thursday. Then you have what you need and it doesn't matter what Goss thinks of me. If he's already made you, he hasn't. He recruited me 2 days ago. He thinks I'm an asset with a financial pressure point and no external affiliations worth worrying about." Gavin paused. "He's right about the financial pressure point." A silence that had something complicated in it. Then Marco. "Thursday. In and out. You don't agree to anything specific about the 14th. Understood." And Gavin. The voice shifted again. That thing Marco did when he was saying something outside the operational frame. "After Thursday, this is done. For you. Whatever happens next on our end doesn't require your presence." Gavin said nothing to this. "I mean that," Marco said. "I heard you." He ended the call. The car had drifted to the curb without Gavin noticing. The driver had found a quiet block and idled them there without being asked. The practiced discretion of someone who understood what he was driving without being told anything specific. Landon was looking at him. "The 43 people," Gavin said, "who work for you." Landon blinked slightly at the subject change. "What about them?" "The acquisitions Goss holds paper on. Are they the primary employment base, or can the company absorb a freeze on those specific assets?" Landon thought about this with the serious attention of a person doing an actual calculation rather than reaching for reassurance. "We can absorb a freeze for 90 days. After that, it starts affecting payroll on 2 of the acquisitions, maybe 22, 23 people. Get your financial team to quietly restructure the internal liability on those acquisitions before the 14th. You don't have to tell them why. Frame it as risk management review. If the assets get frozen after that, the exposure is reduced." Landon stared at him. He stopped. "That's actually the right move." "I know. How do you know corporate liability structuring?" "I read things." Gavin reached for the door handle. "Get the drive tonight. Contact information will be in an account. I'll text you the login from a number you haven't seen before. Don't use your regular phone for anything related to this between now and Friday." He opened the door. "Gavin." Landon said it with the weight that Logan had said it in the utility room 2 days ago. The weight of a name being used to mean something more than identification. "Why are you doing this?" "Not the operation. The 43 people thing. The liability restructuring. That's not your problem." Gavin stood half out of the car with the cold air coming in. He thought about Emma's sweatshirt, about Phil the supervisor's size, about the particular kind of life that is built entirely from the problems of other people who don't know your name. 43 people, he said, is 43 people. He closed the door and walked. Thursday's meeting with Goss lasted 22 minutes. Gavin arrived at 3 p.m. exactly, was met by the same solid-built man in the business casual jacket, was shown to the corner office, and sat across the desk from Harlan Goss in the same chair he'd sat in 2 days ago. The desk was still clean. The HVAC still ran at its slightly too high pitch. Goss's hands were still folded. Goss laid out the specifics of what he was calling a logistics oversight role for the 14th, essentially what Gavin had already known from Logan's disclosure, dressed in the language of legitimate commerce. He used the phrase time-sensitive document transfer to describe controlled ITR restricted military-grade navigation hardware, which said something about how Goss thought about the gap between language and reality. Gavin listened. He asked 2 questions that were reasonable and answered the kind of thing a person in his supposed position would ask. He agreed, in principle, to the logistics role. He did not ask for specifics about the cargo, because asking would be wrong. The asset he was performing wouldn't know enough to ask and wouldn't want to know. Goss seemed satisfied. At the end of the meeting, Goss said, "I want you to know, Mr. Mercer, that I reward reliability. The arrangement on the 14th is a first step. There's more work for people who prove they can handle the first step without complicating it." Gavin nodded. "I understand that." "Good." Goss unfolded his hands. "I think you're going to be a significant asset to this organization." "I appreciate that," Gavin said. He left the 4th floor at 3:22. He went back down to the main floor, retrieved the mop bucket from the utility room, and completed the rest of his afternoon cleaning rotation. His hands were steady, his face was neutral. He finished at 4:05, clocked out, and walked out the service entrance for what he understood, as he crossed the threshold, would be the last time. He texted Marco from the sidewalk. "Thursday complete. Done." Marco's reply came in 40 seconds. "Confirmed. Stand down." 2 words that meant more than they said. The particular relief of a sentence that has a period rather than a comma. Gavin put the phone in his pocket and walked to the bus stop. The 14th came and went. Gavin was not at the Port of Portland. He was at Emma's school for the winter concert, a 40-minute event in the gymnasium involving 23 second graders performing a series of songs with the kind of enthusiastic inaccuracy that is the specific and irreplaceable sound of children doing their best. And Emma was in the second row with both sweatshirts still on because the gymnasium was cold, and she was singing with total unselfconscious commitment, slightly off-key, and at one point looked directly into the audience and found him, and the expression that crossed her face was the purest version of a thing that adults spend their whole lives trying to reconstruct. He put his phone face down on his knee and didn't look at it. He had read the draft account that morning. Marco had left a single entry, Port of Portland Operation 0300, Federal Task Force, 11 arrests, Goss in custody, documentation secured. Below this, a second line that wasn't operational language. It was personal, which from Marco was unusual enough to read twice. The name on the secondary buyer. We got the routing information. This is bigger than the building, Gavin. Thank you. Gavin had deleted the draft, closed the account. The account no longer existed as of that morning. Harlan Goss was in federal custody. The transaction that had been moving toward the port for 11 months had been intercepted intact. Documentation, hardware, the Vancouver broker who had been tracked to a hotel in the Pearl District and detained at 2:40 a.m. by people whose work was written down in places Gavin would never see. The network device in the server room had yielded 10 days of routing data that Marco's people had characterized, in the brief and technical language of people who deal in these outcomes, as significant. The Iron District Combat Academy was under new building management as of 2 days after Goss's arrest, the ownership structure unwinding through the same LLC chain in reverse, managed by a federal receiver whose job was to keep the lights on while the lawyers did their work. Gavin had received a call from Soo Yeon Park on the 12th, 2 days before the operation, telling him that his employment status was under review pending the building ownership transition, and she would have more information within the week. He'd thanked her and told her he understood. He had not gone back. 3 weeks later, he got a call from Logan Pierce. Not a text. An actual call, which Logan almost never made, preferring to communicate through layers of assistance and digital intermediary, and the fact of the call itself carried information before Logan said a word. Gavin answered on his way home from a job interview at a facilities management company on the east side. A proper company, benefits, a salary that wasn't quite enough, but was closer than anything he'd had in 3 years. The interview had gone well in the specific way of interviews where you have a skill set the organization needs, and they know it, and you know it, and the conversation is really just both sides confirming what has already been decided. Hey, Logan said. Hey. A pause. How are you doing? Fine. You? It's... Logan stopped. Started again. The acquisition freeze lasted 6 weeks. We restructured like you said. 18 people affected short term, all retained. Landon handled it. A beat. He was good at it, actually. Better than I expected. Gavin walked the sidewalk in the cold. Good. The grand jury process is... It's a lot. But we have good people on it. Landon has been... Logan seemed to be searching for the word. He's been very straightforward, with the prosecutors. With me. He paused. I don't know what you said to him, but he's different. I didn't say anything special. He told me what you said about the 43 people. That was arithmetic. Gavin. Logan's voice settled. The business English fell away, and what was under it was something more direct, more tired, more real. We want to do something, for you. We have the means to... No. Just hear me out. Logan. Gavin stopped walking. I was in front of a bakery that was closing for the day. The staff inside turning chairs upside down on tables. The window fogged with warmth. I appreciate it. I mean that. But I don't want money from you. It's not charity. We'd be paying for something real. We want to... Landon and I have been talking about formalizing a security consulting arrangement. Not because we need the optics of it, because we actually don't know how to navigate the kind of environment we clearly walked into without knowing it, and we need someone who does. Gavin looked at his reflection in the bakery window. Gray jacket, the face of a 38-year-old man who has had an interesting month. I'm interviewing for a facilities job tomorrow, he said. Second round. I know that's not me dismissing that. I'm just saying the offer is real, and it's on the table when you want to think about it. A long silence. In the bakery, one of the staff said something that made another one laugh. A muffled sound through the glass, completely private. I'll think about it, Gavin said. That's all I'm asking. How's Landon? Honest, Logan said, like it was a surprise. He's honest these days. It's strange. Strange isn't always bad. No, it's not. A pause. Gavin, for what it's worth, what you did in that building, not the other stuff, I mean, the first night, in the gym, when we treated you like it's done. I know, I still want to say I'm sorry for it. Gavin stood on the sidewalk in the cold. He thought about the mop with the cracked handle. He thought about $500 in an envelope and the eviction notice that had been paid on time last month for the first time in 6 months, paid with what Marco's people had quietly transferred into his account the morning after the port operation, clean and documented as contractor compensation, the full $4,500 and then some. You put good technique into that training, Gavin said. Don't waste it. Logan almost laughed. It was a short sound, rough at the edges, more genuine than anything Gavin had heard from him in the private studio. We're going back to basics, Logan said. Landon found a coach. Small gym, nothing like the academy. Old guy, trains out of a converted garage in Selwood. We're there 4 mornings a week. Before sunrise? 5:30. Good, Gavin said. He meant it. Walton. The facilities management job came through 10 days later. Supervisor level position, 40 hours, benefits starting at 60 days, the modest and solid infrastructure of a working life that has actual footing under it. Gavin accepted the offer on a Tuesday afternoon, signed the paperwork, shook hands with the operations director, and drove home in the second-hand car he'd bought the previous week with the last portion of the contractor payment. He picked Emma up from Claire's that evening. She was waiting at the door in her coat. The new one, blue, with the hood that was slightly too big for her and that she wore pushed back so it sat like a collapsed tent on the back of her head. She had paint on her hand from the afternoon that Claire had apparently decided wasn't worth fighting about. She got in the car and buckled herself with the particular focused efficiency of a 7-year-old who has decided she doesn't need help with this anymore. How was school? Gavin said. We did volume in math, like how much space things take up. How'd you do? Good. Miss Kerr said I was fast. You are fast. Emma looked out the window as Gavin pulled from the curb. The evening was clear for the first time in what felt like weeks. Cold, dry, the stars doing their faint work above the city's light pollution. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Are we okay?" He looked at the road, then at her in the mirror. The hood flopped back, the paint-marked hand in her lap, the direct and utterly unperformative quality of the question. "Yeah," he said. "We're okay. Like, actually okay, or like okay that means not okay yet." He almost smiled. Actually okay. She considered this the way she considered things, genuinely, without hurrying toward the answer she wanted. Then she nodded and turned back to the window. "Good," she said. And that was all. The simple, complete finality of a child who has asked the question that mattered and received the answer she needed and can now let the rest of it go. Gavin drove through the evening streets with the heater running and Emma watching the city pass and the new job paperwork in the back seat and the particular weight behind his eyes. Finally, not gone, it was never going to be gone entirely, but quiet. Present, but not pressing. The weight of a life that has been carried rather than the weight of a life that is about to fall. He stopped at a red light on Burnside. Through the windshield, the city spread out in its ordinary November evening. Lit windows, people moving on sidewalks, buses, the infrastructure of a million lives running in parallel, each one carrying its own invisible freight. The light changed. He drove. The cracked mop handle was still in the utility room of a building he'd never go back to. The envelope from Goss was in the recycling. The eviction notice was paid. Marco's number was still in his phone under R, and probably always would be, because some things you don't delete, you just stop looking at. And Emma was in the passenger seat, watching Portland go by with her paint-stained hand resting on the door panel, not asking for anything more than what the evening already was, which was the two of them, moving through the dark, in a car with working heat, going home. The people who had dismissed Gavin Mercer, who had handed him an envelope to stand still and absorb punishment, who had looked through him the way you look through furniture, they had not been wrong about what they saw. The worn boots, the clicking knee, the gray Academy polo that smelled like floor cleaner, all of that was real. What they had miscalculated was the difference between what a person looks like and what a person is, and the further distance between what a person has lost and what they have kept. Gavin had lost a lot. He had kept the parts that mattered. That's the only thing worth measuring in the end, not what life took